Good morning, everyone, or well, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the first global hub of the 5th Global Summit on Student Affairs and Services. Many of you will have participated in your regional hubs already, and I really hope that you all had fruitful conversations there. This is our first activity during the week where all participants are collectively brought together to share our learning and help shape the eventual outcomes of the summit. We're excited to share that this year we have over 140 people registered from 28 different countries, including representatives from 27 various student affairs and services organizations. We are also pleased to have 2 colleagues from UNESCO in attendance. For those who have not seen our welcome video on the summit website, I should introduce myself. My name is David Newman, and I am the Executive Director of Student Experience at the University of Toronto, the Regional Director for North America, Central America, and the Caribbean for the International Association of Student Affairs and Services, and the host of this year's summit. Toronto, Canada, the virtual host location for our meeting, is the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Senecas, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, known to many as North America, and we are grateful to work on this land. Canada, like so many countries represented here, have been shaped by colonialism, and I know that our conversation over the next few days will include reflections on the systems, structures, and opportunities that impact our collective ability to work towards the Sustainability Development Goals, or the SDGs. To open our global meeting in a good way, I would like to invite Lee Maracle, one of our elders at First Nations House at the University of Toronto, to provide a greeting. Lee?
For this. Sorry about that. I turned my mic off and I didn't know how to turn it back on. Good morning, everybody. I have a kind of a special welcome for everyone because I'm 70 now, and this marks the 50th year of my involvement in various universities across the country, including my attendance at one. In the year when we were first enabled and allowed to attend university in Canada. It marked a global change for us on this island. And throughout the course of our education, we also struggled to bring about Indigenous studies on campus. It's fairly common now. Everybody refers to this place as Turtle Island, but at first there was quite a lot of objection to our presence. So I think if you think about this, this is only the 5th global summit on student affairs. So I think Elijah Harper once said that if you give us something, you will get much more from it. You shouldn't object to giving us something, because when you do give us something, you get a great deal more. And I think that on the heel of all the Indigenous rights that has gone on this continent for 50 years now, and that struggle has led to this global summit. Indigenous people themselves have always had a global view of the world as a single planet and all human beings as belonging to that planet. And I want everyone to think about that when they're participating in all the discussions that are going to take place in this summit, and the important decisions that you're going to make, which will last for so long afterward. You'll be 70 one day, some of you younger people, and you'll look back and say, oh my God, that was such an important meeting. Kind of like Roy Mickey said to me once when he talked about the Writing Through Race conference that I hosted many, many years ago. And many people got published that hadn't been published that were people of color. The world is changing. And we are changing the world. We are now conscious that things haven't gone well for everyone. They've gone well for a few. I think that we think of the 1%ers, but now we're looking at making things well for everyone. And I think Murray Sinclair says all the time when he talks that education got us into this mess and education will get us out. And financial services is the very fulcrum of education. So I welcome you. I give you all a special welcome. You're doing heroic work. You are heroic people. This is a terrific fight. And I mean terrific in that it's wonderful. It's difficult work because it's volunteer work, much of it, but it's honorable work and it's terrific work. And it has far-reaching consequences. Our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, the children far into the future are going to look upon these summits as foundational to our wellness that they enjoy in down the road. And I know they will because you're here. You are at University of Toronto, and while I did attend 3 different universities in my lifetime, I did not attend University of Toronto. But I tell you, from my little home on the West Coast, I dreamed of connecting myself to University of Toronto, which was sort of the big hat that everybody wanted to wear one day. And I hope you feel the same way. And I hope that everyone has connected with you in the way you wanted to be connected with. And I hope that you're considering your decisions and your discussion as part of a heroic struggle to bring the world together, to bring the planet under one roof, and to educate the people of the world and not just ourselves. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee. We've been so grateful to have your support in our community at the University of Toronto, and we know that you'll be leaving us in a few months to be closer to your own community. And so thank you, so thankful for your words and contribution. An offering has been made in appreciation. I'd now like to invite Professor Cheryl Reguer, Vice President and Provost of the University of Toronto, to provide a welcome on behalf of the University of Toronto. Cheryl.
Thank you very much, David. And let me start by thanking Lee. Lee, every time I hear you do a welcome, I come away feeling both grounded and uplifted. You have quite an amazing way of making sure you do a call for action at the same time as validating the kinds of efforts that people are making. And so thank you. It's just wonderful to hear you. And to all the rest of you, I'm truly honored to be here today and greet you on behalf of the University of Toronto. We've waited a long time to bring you here today, and I know that David and his colleagues were anxious to host you and show you the city and let you see the university. And much like everything else in COVID, those plans were scuppered. And so I am grateful to you for joining us today in this alternative means. I know you've spent a long time on Zoom and other kinds of meetings, and you're joining us from all kinds of different time zones. And so your efforts and engagement are truly appreciated. If the past year has taught us anything, it's that for better or worse, regardless of where we are in the world, we are all profoundly connected, and we've found ways to connect in ways that we hadn't before. And the pandemic has truly demonstrated how, in the face of global challenge, it's only through working together and mounting a collective effort can we ensure that we're all going to be safe and everyone will thrive across the world. The other thing that we've learned is that the most vulnerable among us have borne the weight of these challenges more than anyone else. And so what COVID-19 has shown us painfully and terribly, until that weight is lifted from everyone, none of us is going to be truly free or safe. So in that vein, this theme of this year's summit, looking at the sustainability, the social development goals, is of profound importance. How can universities contribute to meeting the sustainable development goals that lie at the heart of UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development? How do we maintain our focus on social justice, lifting the weight from those who bear the greatest burden and inspiring students to embrace the sustainability goals in their own paths and their own future? Like here at U of T, we have embraced the UN's SDGs and made sustainability a priority, as I'm sure you have at your own universities. In 2017, we established the President's Advisory Committee on the Environment, Climate Change, and Sustainability to advance coordination of the university's contributions and objectives towards climate change and sustainability. And we're working hard to track our impact and efforts across all 17 of the SDGs, including the 4 that this summit's going to be focusing on: quality education, gender equality, reducing inequality, and climate action. And I'm proud to say we are making progress on all of those at University of Toronto, but we know we have a long way to go. And we're doing it through our teaching, through our research, and through the way in which we run the university. Our students, our faculty, and our staff are working collectively and actively, but they're ensuring that this work is being complemented by their efforts in developing strong collaborations with communities and organizations, both local and international. So let me give you a couple of examples of what the work is that's going on here at University of Toronto. And then we're anxious to hear you share your own work. First, let me talk about the REACH Alliance, a student-driven, faculty-mentored research and leadership initiative that was founded at our Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. That particular program recruits top students from around the world to investigate innovative local solutions to pressing global challenges. Its aim is to create actionable insights on how interventions and innovations reach those in extreme poverty who are geographically remote or who are administratively invisible and marginalized. The REACH initiative works directly to meet SDG 10, reduce inequality within and among our countries. The Office of Community Partnerships and Engagement on our Scarborough campus is another example. And in this one, we're striving to ensure inclusive and equitable access to quality education for all, SDG 4. The staff in that office are devoted to developing collaborative partnerships that both increase access to post-secondary education and leverage the campus's economic influence to build collective assets that benefit the larger community. Our Scarborough campus is located within the midst of a number of high priority neighborhoods in our city and works actively and collectively reaching out and developing programs with the community. We also have numerous researchers, institutes, and programs working on gender equality. And on SDG 13, climate change, we're working to make operational impact that parallels our research and educational contributions. So U of T has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by over 55,000 metric tons over the past decade. And we're in year 3 of our 5-year low carbon action plan to help us further implement carbon reduction strategies. The challenge of sustainable development is urgent and needs to be addressed by all facets of our society, but here in universities, by all facets of our institution. As student affairs and services professionals and leaders, you work at the crucial interface between your institutions and their students. The work you do is inspiring change in the next generation and giving them the tools, be it through the skills you teach, the services you offer, the values you model, or the support you provide to contribute to sustainable development. Our students' readiness for this task, whether they choose it or not, will determine how humanity and our environment will fare in the next century. I am so impressed and heartened by the commitment of this organization to make sustainable development key to its mission. I'm proud of my colleagues here at University of Toronto and Student Services for their collective willingness to respond to the urgent call for action that the UN Sustainable Development Goals represent. And today, U of T is honored to host you, albeit virtually, over the next few days, and I wish you a productive summit. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you, Cheryl. Your words help set the foundation for our conversations for the upcoming days, and how we can connect our work in student affairs and services either through our institutions or our organizations in supporting and moving towards the SDGs themselves. I'd now like to invite Jennifer Hamilton, Executive Director for the Canadian Association of College and University Student Services, or caucus, to provide a welcome and some words about the organization. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, David. And it's really great to see some old friends. Hopefully looking forward to connecting with some of you and to meet some new folks. This is the 5th Global Summit and is my 5th Global Summit. And, didn't have the opportunity to pack up and get on a plane and visit you somewhere exciting. And I'm really sorry that we weren't able to welcome you here to Toronto. So as David said, my name is Jennifer Hamilton and I use the pronouns she, hers, and I'm the Executive Director of Caucus. Caucus is a voluntary membership organization that focuses on the professional learning of student affairs and services staff here in Toronto, or in Canada, sorry. We have about 1,400 members, individual members, and about 110 institutional members across Canada. We were pleased to be able to support the Global Summit when led by AASIS and U of T when we met last in Santiago in Chile in 2018. We were so excited to welcome you here to Toronto in May of 2020. And we were hopeful that some of you would be able to enjoy our beautiful city and our beautiful country. And a year later, here we are, and we're still grateful to be able to meet and learn from one another virtually. These last 14 months have been incredibly challenging for many communities and individuals. And in post-secondary education, we have not been immune to these challenges. Here in Canada, for student affairs professionals, facing these challenges means we are addressing conversations about accessibility in teaching and learning and what that means in the future. We are managing supporting tens of thousands of international students to have a meaningful and successful learning experience. And hopefully we're also reconsidering our work and environments and the impacts of our mental health and well-being of staff, faculty, as well as students. I think the discussion about the UNESCO Sustainable Development Goals during the summit is even more relevant now as we start to enter the off-ramp of this pandemic. And I look forward to the conversations over the next few days. One of the things that you'll notice when you gather in Canada, and I just wanted to mention this because I know people are visiting us from all over the world, that we do tend to acknowledge the land that we live on. And this started in British Columbia, which is on the west coast of our country, where there are no treaties between Indigenous people and the people who stole the land. And the popularity of the land acknowledgement is really meant to assert Indigenous presence and sovereignty in these lands here in Canada and other places in North America. So I wanted to mention that where I live is in Toronto, and it is known as the Dish with One Spoon territory. And the Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee. It brought them together to share the territory and protect the land. and subsequent indigenous people and Europeans and other newcomers have been invited to be part of this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. The dish represents where I live, which is Southern Ontario, from the Great Lakes to Quebec and up to Lake Simcoe and over to the United States. And it's symbolic of the cooperation that we should share in the region, the dish, but we only have one spoon. So it means we need to share the responsibility of ensuring that the dish isn't empty, taking care of the land and each other. And I thought that that was an appropriate way for us to share a little bit about who we are as Canadians, who we aspire to be, but also to help us shape some of the conversations that we want to have over the next few days, that we all have a collective responsibility to look after our communities and each other. So I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm really pleased to be able to connect with all of you, and thank you so much to IASIS for their leadership in bringing us together.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I've had the fortune of knowing Jennifer for many years, and we've worked together in a significant way when I was actively involved on the board of directors for Caucus as well. But I also want to express my appreciation to Jennifer and the Caucus team for their tremendous support in making this event a reality. For all those who entered in through the registration system that was done through Caucus, and there was lots of support along the way. So thank you again, Jennifer. I'd like to now invite Akeem Meyer of der Heide, who is the president of the International Association of Student Affairs and Services, or IASIS, to provide a welcome on behalf of the organization. Over to you, Akeem.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Well, it's really a pleasure for me that such a large number of colleagues joined this global summit from all around the world. And as Jennifer said, this is the 5th global summit, which has been previewed for 2020, but had unfortunately to be postponed to 21 because of the pandemic situation. Already the previous global summits, the UNESCO sustainable goals have been part of the topics, and it seems that they get more and more important, especially in face of the pandemic. After a long period of increasing internationalization and many personal exchanges, the pandemic shows us the limits. It forces us to adhere, to recognize, and to respond to new challenges, especially how to stay in contact worldwide among student affairs professionals when meetings in presence are impossible, like it has been previewed last year in Toronto. How to exchange special solutions in student support, especially owed to the general conditions of the pandemic, or how to deal with the burdens that students experience and feel in the pandemic. The lessons which we have learned from the pandemic, we can't go on as before. We have to face the challenges in the society like climate change, inequity, racism, and to create a better world, especially in higher education, research and student affairs, because the current students will fill out social leadership in the future. So from my perspective, it is logical that we deal with UNESCO Sustainable Development Goals again, as well as we want to address to the UNESCO World Conference of Higher Education, which has been as well postponed from 2020 or former 2019 now to probably 22. The Student Affairs and Services in Higher Education, Global Foundations Issues and Best Practices have been the title of a large book which many of you supported with your contributions and which has been addressed to UNESCO. And the aim was to make student affairs in higher education worldwide visible. And I suppose this book, which has been published in the last year, will be able to promote this goal on the other hand. At least I would like to thank to Kakos, which wanted to host us last year, which is now hosting us this year, to Jennifer Hamilton and to David, and as well to Valerie, which is organizing the Zoom conferences, and of course to the IASIS team. That means Lisa Badil, Birgit Schreiber, Mirela Matsalu, David Newman, Rob Shea, and all the others which have been involved. And I hope that we will have the chance to discuss the sustainable development goals and other things concerning the future of student services and student affairs. And so I wish you all interesting and exciting conference and many exchanges which are able by Zoom. Of course, it would be better in presence, but maybe this will be the next conference in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Akeem. I too am very much looking forward to the learnings and discussions in the coming days, and looking forward to meeting you, as many of you as possible. Echoing what everybody had said, we certainly wish that you were able to be with us in person, but we're glad that you're all able to join us virtually. And I do hope that at some point you'll all take the opportunity to come and visit Toronto and Canada. All right, so I now have the great pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker for the summit. Margaret Biggs is a Matthews Fellow in Global Policy at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, the chairperson of the Board of Governors for the International Development Research Centre, or the IDRC, and chair of World University Service Canada. Ms. Biggs was previously served as president of the Canadian International Development Agency, responsible for overseeing Canada's international development and humanitarian assistance efforts worldwide. She also served as Deputy Secretary for Priorities and Planning in the Privy Council Office of Canada. In 2018, Ms. Biggs co-authored with John MacArthur, A Canadian North Star, Crafting an Advanced Economy Approach to the Sustainability Development Goals. She also co-chaired the study group on the Global Education's report, Equipping the Next Generation of Canadians to Succeed in a Complex World. I had the pleasure of hearing Margaret speak at an event at the University of Toronto when we were discussing our own work and research around the Sustainability Development Goals. And I am so pleased that she was willing to speak with us at our summit. So please join me in welcoming Margaret.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you all for joining today. And I wish that we could all be in Toronto and have an opportunity to meet in person. But we're all used to joining this way, and it's just a real honor for me to be able to speak to all of you and to see where your names are popping up from all around the world. So what a tremendous opportunity for you all to get together. I was asked to talk about the role of universities and student services in relationship to the Sustainable Development Goals. So I thought I would start by just doing a bit of a recap on the SDGs, not because all of you don't know about them, because you do, but often I talk about the SDGs quite a bit. And as you talk to various groups on campus, there's just various levels of understanding and awareness. Certainly in Canada, there's a lot more we need to do to make people aware of the SDGs. So I thought I'd start with a bit of a recap and what the core framework is about, and then talk about the implications for our current work. So maybe I'm just going to I have a few slides and then we'll open up for discussion. So next slide, please. So I'll recap the SDGs. I'll talk a little bit about why they matter, and we've already heard a bit from our speakers that introduced us, from Lee right from the very beginning, and Cheryl, etc. Talk a little bit about why universities and the post-secondary sector and students are so critical to achieving and advancing the SDGs. I'll talk a bit about how universities can align with the SDGs, and then talk about what students can do, because that's probably one of the main areas that you're most interested in and we'll be talking about in the conference. Next slide, please. So you've all seen the map of the SDGs, the 17 goals. Quite often when I'm talking about the SDGs, people say, well, there's so many of them. Why can't we just pick a few to prioritize? And I know for this summit, you have focused in on 4 really critical SDGs. I think the key part about the framework here, though, is that it's an integrated framework. Everything's related and integrated. So there's, even though they look like 4 separate boxes, they're actually wired and very interdependent. The other thing about the SDGs that I often hear is that they're the UN's SDGs, and that's why we have to do them or pay attention to them. But it's really quite the opposite. There was a very extensive process over multiple years, very grassroots, youth groups, community groups, national discussions that led to this framework. So the SDGs are very much what the world told the United Nations and United Nations governments, all the governments of the countries of the world, what really matters to people, to communities. So they're not being imposed by the UN, which is quite often what I hear. They are now being driven and encouraged by the United Nations, but they're very much a product of what people and communities, and particularly youth around the world, said matters. And that's why you see so many of them, because all of these pieces matter in terms of how countries and communities here and there are become successful on a successful path for sustainable development. Next slide, please. And there's a linking here, as Lise talked about right off the bat, how and Indigenous communities and people have taught us this, and we need to listen, that we all live in one planet. We're connected within one planet. These SDGs link together issues related to people, issues related to the planet, issues around how you actually grow and have a productive economy and shared prosperity. They talk about where development happens, not just nationally, but locally. Look at SDG 11 around sustainable cities and communities. And all of these are linked to issues around peace and security, because we know that if people are displaced, if they are food insecure, they will move, there will be conflict, etc. So this is an integrated framework. If you look back on the predecessors of the SDGs, which were the Millennium Development Goals, they really were focused more on issues related to people. The issues related to the environment and the planet were on a different track. And one of the great achievements of the SDGs is they bring these elements all together within one framework, one integrated framework. Next slide, please. So it's integrated. What's new with the SDGs as well, as we all know, is that they're universal. These are not about everybody else's countries. This is not from, if you're in Canada, about countries in the global south. These are applied to everybody. Every single country is on a path and not yet achieved a sustainable pathway for their future. So they're universal. All countries, all communities can hold a mirror up to themselves and assess how they're doing in relation to the SDGs. And I've been involved in some work here in Canada that, where we fall short on many of these SDGs, and we're not on track to achieve many of these SDGs. And so it gives you a basis for having that conversation. What's different about the SDGs as well is they're not about getting to 50% of the people or 50% of this or that. They're really about leaving no one behind. They're about getting to zero in terms of access to quality education and in terms of access to food security. And again, they're global and they will be reported on globally, but they also relate to countries and to local communities, and others like universities can take them and embrace them and look at them in terms of how they're actually working to achieve the SDGs. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more about why the SDGs matter. Again, people often think that the SDGs are some kind of side issue that they have to work on in addition to their real work. But I know here in Canada, we do not have any other framework that actually integrates all these elements together, that brings together issues around inclusion, social inclusion, equity, and issues around environmental sustainability, the Paris Climate Accord, et cetera. So it's an integrated framework. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, I think, is worth pointing out as well, because it is integrated within the Sustainable Development Goals. The rights of Indigenous people, and many Indigenous leadership and communities, certainly here in Canada, have embraced the SDGs because they actually incorporate the concepts and the principles of UNDRIP, and they actually were actively involved and got involved in the development of the SDGs. Just go back one slide, thanks. What's really important about the SDGs is that they're goals that can create universal outcomes and metrics so that we can have the same language and talk about communities, whether you're in, I saw people popping up from Indonesia, South Africa, Costa Rica, no matter where you are, it's the same language. It's a lingua franca for international cooperation, a way to actually link, not just link conversations, but link analysis and science. And the time frame of 2030 doesn't mean that we have a long time to wait. But it does mean that they're not going to go away. They're not going to change tomorrow. And we're going to flip the chart and we're going to have different colors and different boxes. They're there for a while and they transcend political cycles, new government, they sustain the public spotlight on a particular, these issues. So that's really critically important because these are sort of for the medium and the longer term. Next slide, please. So we've already talked a little bit about COVID and how challenging it's been, the impact on communities, on people, the health impact, the economic impact. I think what I would just summarize is that the COVID-19 pandemic here and all around the world has really exposed a couple of things. People started talking initially about how it's the great equalizer because anybody can get the virus. The truth is that it's actually not been a great equalizer. It's been a great disequalizer, if that's a word. It's really revealed very stark, often compounding multiple inequalities. It's exposed intergenerational inequities, which I think important for this group to speak to, in terms of how youth and children are, and we'll come back to this, are being left behind. How people and communities and countries are interconnected. We heard that from Cheryl right off the top. I mean, we know that no one's going to be safe until everybody's safe in terms of the virus, and it's actually exposed how interconnected we really were, and how issues are interdependent. How we're talking about a public health crisis that has brought down the greatest economic shock to the global economy in 100 years. We've also found out that the governance really matters. How we manage, how competent we are in terms of managing a crisis like this really matters. And that, of course, is SDG 16. And then I think for this conversation, rather than sort of overtaking the COVID pandemic, overtaking the SDGs and maybe making them less relevant and like we can't really worry about them anymore, I think they've made them more important, more critical. They've shone the light on the issues that are embedded in the SDGs around inequality, access to quality education, all these issues, and they provide a pathway out of the crisis for more inclusive, more shared prosperity and development, and for more sustainable development. And I know that one of the SDGs that you're going to be talking about is around climate, and the climate crisis is going to compound the inequities that we've seen through this crisis. Just a few facts, just to ground the conversation here. The crisis has led to 166 countries being thrown into an economic recession, which is huge. We know that already about 120 million people have been pushed back into extreme poverty. We know that these problems, these challenges and impacts have not been shared equally. We know that some communities, particularly in our country, racialized communities, more informal economy, people who don't have access to proper health benefits and leave, had double, triple whammies. They really have borne the brunt of this crisis, both in terms of their economic impact, but also in terms of the health impact. And that is replicated all around the world. And of course, country like Canada, we have a pretty good social safety net. We have a fair amount of fiscal power to sort of try to provide support to people who've lost their jobs, who have to take time off for health reasons. But that's not the same in many lower and lower middle income countries. They just don't have those. So the impact has been much more acute in many of those countries. And then kids, children, we know that at the beginning, a year ago, over 1.5 billion children were out of school. Many of them have gone back, but many have not. And we know that in many communities, when children are forced out of school, particularly girls, they won't be going back. We also know that the learning outcomes, the suffering in our country, in every country, that the students that are going to suffer the most in terms of the loss of their learning and of their potential it's really many of the more vulnerable students. And those learning gaps are going to be hard to make up. They're going to require extra effort, but some of those learning gaps may actually affect people for their lifetime. And it's the same for youth who are just coming out of education or trying to get that first job. We know that this economic impact could have a scarring effect for them over the course of their lifetime. So all the more reason why we need to focus on these goals and focus on how to make sure that these people, the students and youth, are not left behind. And I think that probably that's why working with students and focusing on quality education is probably one of the most critical issues to focus on in terms of the path out of this crisis, in terms of how to make sure that this crisis does not mean that more youth, more children are left behind and that they're not able to reach their potential. Next slide, please. So the universities, colleges, most of you work on campuses and work with students, faculty. I think we probably all know that universities are important and that education is important, but the bottom line is that none of us will achieve the Sustainable Development Goals on the current trajectory that we're on. We will not get there with business as usual approaches. We just won't. We need innovation. We need new ways of working. We need intergenerational collaboration. We need more debate and dialogue. And we need radical breakthroughs. And we are not on track to achieve the SDGs. We weren't before the crisis and we're not now. That does not mean we give up on the SDGs. It means that we're going to have to generate much more powerful solutions and breakthroughs. And that's going to have to come from new ways of thinking and working in inquiry and innovation. And where else but university? And where else but through research and innovation and student engagement? And so universities and students and faculty are particularly critical for the achievement of the SDGs. They're uniquely positioned. Where else do you bring multiple generations together, multiple disciplines together, that have the platform to bring multiple sectors together? And universities, as it says in a little quote there, have a service and vocation to serve the existing society, but also to challenge society to shape a better future. So post-secondary sector is absolutely critical for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. But sometimes, and I have worked a bit with the University of Toronto and Queen's University and some other Canadian universities who are switched on to the SDGs, but often on campus, they need to kind of like, well, why does it matter? Why do the SDGs matter for them? Like, what is it linked to in terms of the other things that they care about and their strategies? And so a couple of things to think about here in terms of why the SDGs actually really help the universities deliver on what they currently are dealing with in their own work. First and foremost, the SDGs require a degree of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary collaboration that we've never seen before, and systems thinking, because these goals are all interrelated. We know that the health and the economy are related. We know that conflict is related to food insecurity and to climate change. They're all interrelated. We need to bring disciplines and different ideas together, and we're not used to doing that, and universities are struggling to try to find a way to break down the silos between the disciplines and the faculties, and the SDGs are an immense, incredible tool for doing that. We know that universities need to embrace the SDGs because these are the issues that care to students. I've heard a number of university administrators and leaders saying that this is what their students are asking for. They're asking to focus on issues that really matter to their future, that require global solutions and local solutions. The kind of thinking and work that the SDGs require really align very much with the kind of 21st century competencies and skills that are going to be required and that students are going to need in terms of when they come out of their education. And UNESCO has done a really useful piece of work around tracking the SDGs two different kinds of skills and competencies, not just the knowledge that they're going to learn, but the way to think, the problem solving that's involved in the kind of the critical thinking that's involved in 21st century education. And again, this is something that's really critical for most colleges and universities. And again, because the SDGs are global and local and national, they actually facilitate that kind of global engagement and research that that all kinds of universities are really striving for. And finally, certainly in Canada, I think around the world, universities and student services are really embracing equity and inclusion and diversity and goals around indigeneity. And the SDGs, those are embedded within the SDGs. So it's just a framework that naturally can be used to advance EDI goals and also in Indigenous goals. Next slide, please. Just a little picture of the universities and the SDGs and how universities can embrace the SDGs. First off, right off the top, in terms of their service to the community and to their countries, a number of universities that I'm familiar with, certainly U of T, Queen's University, others are really focusing very much on their impact, on their social service, on their social justice mission, on their global purpose, and bringing that much more to the fore. Research and innovation. This is where the ideas and the new innovations are going to happen. So the SDGs are a ready-made framework to help to influence strategies around research and innovation, to get research focused on those the real conjunction of really critical issues where we need to find solutions. On teaching and learning, I think as Cheryl, the provost, mentioned right off the bat, a lot of what students are demanding and a lot of what the SDGs require is a different way of teaching and learning, experiential learning, much more problem solving, much more real world applied, like the REACH initiative that at the University of Toronto around solving real world problems and then bringing the disciplines and the analysis to bear. So different ways of thinking and also much more cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary teaching and learning. This is not the way most universities are wired. The incentives are not always there to work this way in terms of research or in terms of teaching. And I think that with the SDGs, it provides more of an incentive and a framework for how to do that. In terms of global networks, certainly the U of T, University of Toronto, is one of the most globally connected universities, certainly in Canada and the world. And it's hugely important for students and faculty to feel that they're connected with global research networks, to be connected with global networks and then bring them back home. I think that's true probably for all of the institutions, for all of you that are connected here today. And finally, partnerships. This is SDG 17. Universities are the natural platform to bring different groups together, whether it's business communities, local governments, civil society. Universities can provide the space, the neutral space, the places for dialogue, the platforms for networking, et cetera. Who else but universities and students to lead on that? So universities and the SDGs have many different ways that they can integrate the SDGs into the work, and I probably should include in there the way they operate, because as Cheryl mentioned early on, all universities can look at their own impact, for example, in terms of their carbon and greenhouse gas impact. Next slide, please. Something you probably all know about, but just if you don't, just to flag that universities are used to being ranked and assessed, but there's out of the Times Higher Education, there's a new ranking called the impact rankings that are aligned with the SDGs. And there's that saying, what measures matters and gets done. Well, now universities, on a voluntary basis right now, they submit, but are being ranked in terms of their impact against the SDGs, in terms of their research, in terms of their teaching, in terms of their outreach, their partnerships, and also in terms of their stewardships. The University of Toronto actually has done really quite well on this. And right now, I think universities are using it to collect up what they're currently doing. But it's a way to raise the profile and the importance of the SDGs, and then to begin to build issues to shape the research programs, to shape the curriculum, again, and they're going to get rewarded for it because they're going to do better in terms of these impact rankings. Not all universities in Canada certainly are switched on to this, but I think that this is that these new impact rankings are going to matter. People are going to pay more attention to them. They're going to be something that students are going to look for in terms of where they choose to work. So I would watch this space, and if your universities are not currently switched on to the impact rankings, it's something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to mention as well, because the SDGs are being used by other sectors, certainly civil society, business. There's a number of business coalitions that are looking at the SDGs, but I think one of the really powerful catalysts around action for the SDGs is going to happen in cities and communities. And a number of major cities are using the Sustainable Development Goals to, again, organize their strategic thinking, to organize their operations, to organize what matters to them. Los Angeles is being one of them, but there are others. And I think that's just going to Pittsburgh, for example, in the United States of America, is very much aligned around the SDGs and is working with Carnegie Mellon, which is a major university in Pittsburgh. And that's a double whammy. You know, when you have a major university also with a community, that's a very powerful compact and coalition of effort. So watch for that as well. Next slide, please. So finally, and I think this is probably where your work is going to be focused, and just to sort of launch that part of the discussion, how does this relate to student services and what students can do? Student services very much at the nexus of the student experience, how students are experiencing university, their academic experience, their community experience, and how they relate to their institutions. So for discussion afterwards, and also in your discussion, what can students do? I think first and foremost, students can bring moral clarity to these issues. It's their futures. It's their planet. It's their societies that are at risk, and so students can be the game changers in terms of bringing moral clarity, bringing voice, and not giving up, bringing that fortitude to actually keeping the focus on what matters here, which is about a sustainable planet, a more inclusive society and economy, a more peaceful, well-governed society. So students bring that. Students also bring their ability to make connections, to build awareness, to build communities of practice, again, amongst student groups, campus to campus, but also in their own home communities. They have the power to build networks in a way that my generation, for example, doesn't. Students can build that kind of awareness and connections. They can advocate for change within their universities. They can ask just challenging questions about the extent to which their own institutions are focused on impact, are focused on social purpose, are focused whether the curriculum is striving to align to the kind of interdisciplinary teaching and problem solving that the SDGs demand. Students can challenge where the research investments are going, where the research priorities are focused on helping to solve the biggest problems that societies are facing. And again, with students, again, certainly on the campuses that I'm aware of, they have this power to link with student bodies and students in other countries and locally. And again, I would emphasize to link with, certainly in our country, to link with Indigenous communities and Indigenous partners who have, again, with whom they're in solidarity in terms of what's trying to be required here. I should have said something that's quite dear to my heart. I didn't include here. I think students can also go global in terms of their own education, and would encourage, to the extent possible, students have that global experience in terms of getting outside of their own comfort zones, their own communities. We know that's difficult to do physically now. We also know it's difficult because it's often not that affordable, but it can be done through other means. And we found that already over the past year how students can have a global education, have global connections, but without necessarily having to leave their own countries. And finally, students, and students are very good, are real leaders on this. They can embrace sustainability in their own lives and on campus. They can push very much for their own university campuses to embrace the SDGs in terms of their own operations. Certainly, I've seen that at the University of Toronto, and keep holding people's feet to the fire in terms of walking the talk on the SDGs. So I'm going to leave it there. I just pointed out that I know you have the four SDGs that you're going to focus on in your work. I think they're all, as I said, they're all connected. All the 17 are connected, but countries, communities like yours can zero in on a few that really matter to your own communities. And I think we've seen how education, gender equality, and equality are just this, have really been exposed during this current crisis as being of critical importance in terms of people's ability to move forward, and in terms of countries' ability to get on a more sustainable and inclusive path. Climate climate impacts are going to adversely affect the people and the countries and the communities who can least afford it. That's true in our own country. It's true around the world. And so all the more reason why it's so critical that you're focusing on that. And I added a fifth one if you wanted to bring it into your discussions, because I think in all of when you talk about these four, I think partnerships are going to be absolutely critical in terms of the partnerships of students and universities with civil society, with Indigenous communities, with the private sector, with governments. We will not achieve the SDGs one sector on their own. It's really critical to build these cross-sector partnerships as well. And I think universities and students are probably better positioned than anybody to do that. So I'm going to stop there and open it up for discussion, David, and see what's on people's minds. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Margaret. And I think, yeah, that interrelationship between all of the SDGs, I think is something that certainly you and I even discussed when we were talking about the keynote and the importance of that. So there have been some comments about throughout the chat, just sort of saying how people are kind of hearing that it's really important to highlight the work that we're doing in student affairs and services around this. So just so everyone knows, and I did mention this in the chat, if people do have questions, to please put them in the chat and I'll attempt to moderate them. There are a few questions already, so we have about 15 minutes in total, everyone, so just so you know. So I actually sort of received the question in two different ways. There's similar questions, so I'm going to tell you both of them because there's, I think, elements that are slightly different. So where do student affairs and services report their SDG focused work, or are SDGs only measured in terms of measurable outcome? So that's question one. The other one that's pretty similar is in student affairs and services broadly, many of our programs and services could be seen as responsive to the SDGs, yet many of our teams aren't even aware of them. Would you recommend being more explicit in our alignment to these goals? And are there pros and cons to that? So that's the first one.
Wow. I'll start at the second part of the question. I would recommend personally, but again, there's lots of expertise in this, in this forum at the summit on this, on different people's experience. Yes, I would encourage, being more explicit about the Sustainable Development Goals. Not in a way, and I've had this conversation with lots of groups, including with people in government. Not to say that they're replacing what you're doing, other things that you're doing. They're not another framework. They're a way to integrate what many people are already doing, and to provide what we often call a North Star in terms of guiding that work. And I would be more explicit about them, because without being explicit, you can't build that community. They're a common language, they're a common framework. They allow people to get on the same page. sort of literally and figuratively. So there is a utility to actually talking about them. And I've been involved in a number of exercises. This is what we did at the University of Toronto, where you bring people from different backgrounds together, different disciplines together, and actually have them talk about how each of their disciplines or their sectors relate to SDG 4 or SDG 10, and actually use them. Actively use the SDGs to build, to have those conversations that we aren't having right now because we're all in our own little worlds and our disciplines and our universities or whatever. So I think the SDGs are they're a North Star. They teach us, they help us, they guide us, but they're also a tool that you can use in terms of engaging conversations. So yes, absolutely on that. In terms of the work that you do, I think, I'm not quite sure, I'm not the expert on how you report on the work that you do, but if you're helping to encourage students to be active in this area, I think reporting on the activities that are relevant to student engagement, to their ability for students to have these conversations, things that student services can do to sort of animate and aid in this area, I think all of that's to the good. The SDGs themselves are around outcomes. And it is about actually moving the dial, whether it's on safe water or quality education. And certainly there's going to be all kinds of communities, whether you're in the education faculty or the health faculty, who can actively work on those outcomes. I see, if I'm right, David, student services more at the nexus. You're more of a catalyst for those conversations. You're more of an enabler for those conversations to switch on others. So reporting on how you're doing that, how you're engaging students, how you're catalyzing those conversations and helping students who I think really want to have these conversations, I think is very much what you can be doing. I hope that it helped. Hope that's in the right zone, David.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think you're right. Just reflecting on that, just in my own portfolio, we recently launched a new strategic plan for our student affairs portfolio. And although we didn't explicitly talk about sustainability development goals in it, we talked about sustainability so that we can make sure that when we're reporting back on these elements that we can actually connect them back to the goals themselves. So no, thank you for that. Another question. So SDG 4 speaks about ensuring equal access, and yet we would have needed more emphasis on the higher education system expanding and being strengthened. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, if I understand the question, thank you for the question. SDG 4, well, first I would say the SDGs are not perfect. They're not perfect because the world's not perfect, and they were actually very much the result of a very interactive process, and so, but they are very much the best we have, and we've never had a framework like this before. So that's their value, that's their utility, and certainly within various SDGs, there's things that are missing. So I don't personally take them as sort of like that's all you have to care about at all. And some people would argue that in some of the indicators aren't necessarily the right indicators, and there's people over in data land and indicator land that are duking it out on various indicators. But again, if you use them as a North Star, as a way to guide, SDG 4 is around not just equal access, but equal access to quality education. And I think that applies not just to primary education, it also applies to secondary and clearly to tertiary education. I would take the inspiration of the SDGs and apply them to your own work, as opposed to feeling confined by them. I would feel that you're guided by them, if you know what I mean.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to read what it says in the chat here. Thank you for this information and your perspectives. In general, U.S. higher education is behind the curve in embracing the SDGs. I enjoyed your linkage between graduate competencies and the SDGs and see this as a way we work them to mainstream student affairs and services work here. Can you speak a little bit more to this potential parallel between the SDGs and meta competencies students need to be productive, contributing global citizens?
Great question. Thank you. First, just on the United States, certainly in Canada, it's uneven in terms of the extent to which universities and colleges are looking at the SDGs and actively using them to help shape their strategies, their research portfolios, their student engagement. But I would say that it's catching on. I would say that I just speak from Queen's University because I was at UT last year, but I also do things at Queen's University. For the first year, decided they were going to start using the SDGs as a North Star, as a way to focus on, yeah, we're all doing important work, but we need to be more than just, all the things we teach and the courses we teach and whatever. We have to have a greater social purpose. We have to have a greater social global purpose. And they've started using SDGs, so they actually submitted into the Times Higher Education impact rankings this year for the first time, and actually came out very high in the world and the best in Canada. They probably won't stay there. They'll be challenged to stay there, but that's what's terrific about it, is because they need to do better. And other universities across the country will I think it'll start to magnify and multiply. It's happening in Australia and New Zealand, for example, because they're very dominant in terms of the Times Higher Education impact. So I think it'll take on. In the United States, I think it's going to take on too, but just a little bit slower. But I would just say in the United States, the Association of Public Land Universities, which are a lot of the major universities in the United States, have done a lot of thinking around the SDGs. And there's a number of campuses like University of California, Davis, and Carnegie Mellon. So there are Georgia Tech, who have been leaders on this. So there are universities in the United States who are very active in this area, and I think hopefully will be role models for others. On your other question to do with competencies, I've done in another part of my brain, I've done work on labor market issues and skills and competencies and learning, and certainly all the evidence, and this is why global education relates to these sort of meta competencies. All the research shows us that students, yes, they need some subject knowledge, and they need to know how to do engineering, et cetera. But really, what's going to be needed now and going into the future are the other kinds of critical thinking skills. The ability to work with people, the ability to problem solve, not just the knowledge, but the knowledge is the base, and the knowledge may actually change pretty quickly because the world's changing so quickly. But these kinds of critical 21st century skills, and that's it's all over the place, and that's what the UNESCO study explores, and it also explores the kind of systems thinking which you often don't get in traditional higher education. So this is the future, and to equip our students, your students, for the kinds of jobs that they need to have, the kind of economy that we need to grow. These are the kinds of skills and competencies that we need to encourage. And right now, I can say in Canada, our universities and colleges have not reached the tipping point in terms of getting there, and I think that's probably true in lots of your countries. So I think that probably from a student services, I'm not sure the role of student services in terms of curriculum. Sorry, David, but I think you're absolutely onto something here. That this is absolutely critical, and to look at what the offerings are. Whether in terms of what's being taught, but how it's being taught, experiential learning. I would say global education is in there too, because it's a very powerful way for students to develop the kind of thinking and resilience and adaptability that are going to be required in the labor market going forward.
Great, thank you. Few more questions have come in. And so one is a little bit about metrics and reporting. So especially those institutions that are government funded or connected to the government, there's certain types of institutional accountabilities that happen. And so in terms of layering and embedding, do you have any advice, or have you seen any good practices of how this marriage is done for a cohesive, connected reporting accountability framework for these outcomes connected to the SDGs?
Wow. I'm sorry, I probably don't, I should, but I don't. Um, let me come at it from what I little bit that I do know. You know, at a country level, I mean, countries are on a voluntary basis. They're called voluntary reports to the United Nations, and showing what they're doing at a national level. In fact, some countries are, it's not just that, some countries are, Canada's a federation, so we have different orders of government, but some countries have done an extremely good job and have been really forward leaning and are real pathfinders in terms of how to report as a country against the SDGs, the outcome metrics. Canada's not done that yet. So I'd say we are not at the front of the line on this, but other countries have, and there's some very good examples. And if you look at, there's a number of ways of looking at this, and I would just point people to, well, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN. You know, that's one resource for you to look at which countries are actually doing a good job on that. The International Institute for Sustainable Development, IISD, also does a lot of work around SDG reporting, just to find out, okay, what can we learn from how countries are reporting on this, and how they actually report up. And to do that, you actually have to have the national statistical base that can generate that. And in some cases, actually, many lower income, middle income countries are better at this than a country like Canada, because they actually have aligned their development programs and policies around the Millennium Development Goals, you know, which really capture the education, the food, the sanitation, the health outcomes that are embedded in the SDGs that moved over from the MDGs. So in some cases, they actually have better ability to report on the SDGs, in some aspects of the SDGs than we do in some, because a country like Canada, we're not used to reporting on this level. We're just not, which is like a huge stretch for a country like Canada, a huge stretch for a country like the United States. So so that's one thing. So countries are doing voluntary reviews of how they're doing and how they measure up. Some cities are doing that now. So you look at cities are doing voluntary reviews of how they're doing and how they can measure up against these outcomes. And again, that requires having the data to do it and the disaggregated data to do it. But at least it makes a bit of an incentive to actually develop the systems that can report on it. And then a city like Los Angeles or Melbourne or Milan or Copenhagen or whatever can then look at, well, how are we doing and how are we moving the needle? I don't think universities have the same, because universities can say where their research and their teaching is contributing, but they can report on some of the sustainability outcomes in terms of their own operations and things like that. So the issue around reporting is huge. There's no point having these SDGs out there if we don't actually actively use them to measure whether or not we're on track or what needs to change. That's one of the geniuses, or sort of one of the gifts of the SDGs. If I can just, David, just one little example. A colleague of mine, John MacArthur, who's at the Brookings Institution, did some work on how Canada measures up against the SDGs. And again, what he found, and because we haven't reported nationally, our statistical agency is doing a lot of work in this area, but we haven't reported nationally in Canada. What he found using the data that he could access, what he found is, well, number one, Canada is not on track to achieve any of the SDGs. We're falling back on some, and we are a very advanced economy. We have, but there are many areas where we're not on track to achieve them, even by 2030. Issues like clean water, because we aren't, in many northern and indigenous communities, we're not on track. And then you can go down to this, and then you can also identify where we have data shortcomings. So these efforts to actually map the SDGs and to look at it actually are very revealing. But if you don't know that you're falling short, and you're falling short in terms of the trajectory, not just in terms of the absolute level that you're at, because many industrialized countries should be fairly far along in terms of issues around, education and health. But are they moving the needle? We won't know until we start measuring. And in most cases, we're not actually on track. So I think it can be a very powerful tool. But I don't know any universities that are doing it, except I do know that Carnegie Mellon, again in Pittsburgh, has voluntarily volunteered to be the first university to do a voluntary review of them, of their own, and they're hoping that other universities will catch on.
That's great. We have more questions than we have time for. I'm going to try and bring together a few questions just for the last minute or so to talk a little. Just if you could comment a little bit about reconciling the tension between metrics and rankings and things like that, and actual bringing people along the journey for other reasons, including social good reasons and other things. So I don't know if you have any sort of closing comments about that piece, because it was a bit of a theme through a few questions.
Yeah, I do understand the question. I guess I may be offside and on this, and I wish I'd hear your discussions, but I guess I'm fairly practical. I think that any tool that we have that can build awareness and that can be used to get to new communities, broaden the community of interest, and the power. Like, I look at universities, and we're not going to get to the SDGs if the power of universities is not switched on, in terms of the brain power, the intergenerational collaboration, the engagement of students. I just personally don't think we're going to get there. And we may not get there just through, someone like me sort of talking about the moral imperative and the ethical imperative and the issues around social justice, which I do all the time. I think that we have to talk about issues to do with social justice and why it matters from a moral and ethical point of view in terms of building a just society. But if we have a tool like the impact rankings that actually begin to build awareness and actually hold the light up against institutions to see how they're doing, I think I'm okay with that. And because then it enables the discussion around how we need to work, and going back to what Lee talked about, how we're under one planet, we're under one framework, and the importance of inclusion and equity in everything we do. So I hope maybe that's the subject for all your discussions. You can talk. I know that, I'll just say one more thing, David. I know that certainly in Canada, there's discussions around, for example, SDG 5, which you're going to be looking at, and which is actually hugely important in its own right from an equality and equity point of view. But there's also, for many people, it's also a portal through which you can get to other SDGs. It's an enabler. But some would view that as being kind of extractive and instrumentalist in terms of, and there's a tension there. I personally, I can square that circle myself, but it's a discussion that maybe you'll have when you tackle SDG 5.
Well, that's great. We're at time now, but I do want to thank you so much for your thoughtful words and insights today. I'll share with you what was sort of in the chat as well. I'll send that all to you, just because there was a lot of comments and,
sure.
And thoughts about how your words have been helpful. And you've certainly given me a lot to consider. And I know that you've given us all a lot of good advice and thought for the coming days of the summit, especially through our regional and interregional hubs and other conversations. So I am incredibly grateful that you took the time to speak with us today. Thank you for joining us. And of course, you're welcome to join for the rest of the sessions, but I know you have a lot on your plate too. So thanks,
David. Thanks very much, David, and good luck with all your sessions. An incredibly important summit that you're having, and powerful to engage your students in your campuses. So good luck to you.
Great, thank you. So we need to set up for the next session. So we're actually going to have a short 6-minute break so that we can get it set up for the next session. So go get some water or whatever, and we will begin promptly at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So that's the Toronto time. So there is a time zone converter on the conference website if you need to see what that is, but it's in 6 minutes from now. So see you soon. and talk about the Global Commons program. When we were planning the in-person version of the summit a year ago that we needed to postpone, our events were actually going to be taking place in Hart House, which is a very special place at the University of Toronto. But even when we were planning a year ago, we knew that we wanted to share with participants about the Global Commons, which is something that Hart House works in partnership with a number of other institutions around the world and have been focusing on a number of topics that can be connected to the SDGs. And they've been running this for the past several years. So I would like to introduce our speakers for the session. So John Monahan has been the warden or Chief Executive Officer of Hart House since his appointment in 2015. He has a background as a lawyer, a diplomat, and a public servant. Before joining Hart House, John was the executive director of the Mosaic Institute, a Toronto-based think and do tank that engages local diasporas in global efforts to reduce conflict through education, dialogue, and action. Jennifer Newcomb is the director of strategic initiatives at Hart House. In her current role, she leads a portfolio that includes the development and delivery of dialogue-based co-curricular opportunities, including the Hart House Global Commons Initiative. Marko Adamovic is an artist, cultural producer, and educator, and currently works as the coordinator, learning and community at Hart House at the University of Toronto. His graduate work and research focused on experiential learning, critical pedagogy, and arts in education. His professional background is in international education, youth and student development, and community engagement. And Kanishka Sikri is a feminist writer, consultant, and theorist unraveling the multiple faces and forms of racial and gendered violence. Kanishka has recently completed her undergraduate degree in critical development at the University of Toronto, and she helps coordinate the Student Advisory Committee and Dialogue to Action project with the Hart House Global Commons. Over to the Hart House team.
Thank you very much, David. It's great to be here. A little bit odd to be introduced by David because we spend so much time together. David is actually a member of the Board of Stewards of Hart House, and we're delighted at the contributions that he makes to our work. Hello, everybody. We're really, really happy and excited to share with you this morning a little bit of work that we do under the banner of the Hart House Global Commons. And just to remind you about forms of engaging with the presenters this morning. If you have questions that come up while we're presenting, of course, we invite you to put them in the chat. We'll try to respond as we go. And then we'll also provide a time at the end for questions. And there's also going to be a period for breakout groups, which we will try to get to with as much haste as possible without shortchanging you on information so that you have some opportunity to share some experiences and good practices with each other and then bring them back to the larger group. So the agenda is on the screen. I'm principally going to speak about what is the Hart House Global Commons, and then Jennifer, Marko, and Kanishka are going to take turns sharing how the Hart House Global Commons relates to the SDGs, talking a little bit about our experience of student engagement, what we are learning, what we have learned, what we are learning continually from the Hart House Global Commons project, and then the small group discussion that I promised you. So again, my principal role here is to introduce you to the Hart House Global Commons. And that first requires that you understand what Hart House is. So Hart House, as you can see from the screen, is a dynamic, inclusive student center at the University of Toronto for exploration and discovery outside the classroom that is focused around the arts, dialogue, wellness, and community engagement. It is also a space for lifelong learning that invites and enables all students, faculty, staff, alumni, and members of the broader community to better understand themselves, one another, and the world that we all share. Now, as David mentioned, were it not for the global pandemic that sadly intervened, we would actually be meeting in person this morning at Hart House, because among many other things, Hart House is a major event and conference venue at the University of Toronto, and in fact, in downtown Toronto. It is a well-known and well-recognized event venue across the city. But Hart House is not a building. Rather, we are a student-focused, multi-stakeholder community for co-curricular education. We were first established about 102 years ago, or actually exactly 102 years ago, by Vincent Massey and the Massey Foundation. And when it was established, Hart House was one of, if not the first student center of its kind or scale in North America. Today, Hart House serves and is largely funded by the ancillary fees of 90,000 University of Toronto students across 3 campuses. We also have, during normal days, we have several revenue generating operations as well. So although we are not a building, we do happen to have a pretty significant building where we work and play, and it is that 220,000 square foot neo-Gothic castle on your screens now that is located in the center of U of T's St. George campus. And we are also fortunate enough to have a 150-acre farm just northwest of Toronto in an area known as Caledon. I also want to note quickly that Hart House is additionally a center for the development and practice of student leadership. A majority of the members of our main oversight body, the Hart House Board of Stewards, are students. They are either representatives from student unions or they are stewards from a number of Hart House standing committees, including music, theater, social justice, recreational athletics and wellness, to name just a few. And those committees themselves, most of them are also either all or predominantly students. Now, we'd like to share just a very brief video with you that will hopefully give you both a visual and a visceral sense of Hart House the way it was back in 2019, before the world changed. So it makes me a little bit wistful to see so many people gathered together in Hart House. It also makes me wistful to see my hair so short, but we will be back there soon. So that is Hart House. But what, you ask, is the Hart House Global Commons, which came into being back in 2017? Well, you might describe the Global Commons as follows: a space for university students from around the world to become more engaged and interconnected global citizens through deep learning and real-time discussions about issues that are pressing and pertinent across geographies and cultures. Now, in just a minute, Jen and Marco and Kanishka will share with you how the space we call the Hart House Global Commons is structured and how it operates and how it engages students. But first, why did we create the Global Commons? So the answer is a mixed one, but very briefly, back when I started at Hart House in 2015, I was just coming off my tenure as executive director of the Mosaic Institute, as David said. And that's a small think and do tank that is all about engaging young Canadians in difficult discussions and practical responses to entrenched conflicts around the world. And I had seen in doing that work firsthand how life-changing those opportunities had been for our participating young people, how much they had grown as global citizens, how valuable their contributions to peace building had been, both at the local and the national and international levels. And so I was really eager for Hart House to create or co-create opportunities with U of T students so that they could have similar experiences. And that happened to coincide with the development of our last 5-year strategic plan in 2016, called Delight and Discovery. And as we were developing that plan, it became clear that we really needed to have a cornerstone initiative that would help to reinforce Hart House's distinctive ability to bring people together through conversation and dialogue. And then the third principal reason why we developed the Hart House Global Commons is that we wanted to align our cornerstone programming with the top priorities of the university. And here, those are referred to as the presidential priorities. And very briefly, they are, number one, to maximize the university's integration with and contributions to the local community. Number two, to strengthen international partnerships and expand opportunities to students, for students to benefit from an internationalized learning experience. And third, but not least, to rethink and enhance undergraduate education. And we've tried to develop the Global Commons in such a way that it underscores and reinforces all three of those priorities. So we brainstormed, we created the concept of the Global Commons as a place where the world, or at least some of the world, could come together to explore these pressing issues that were simultaneously personal, local, and global in relevance, and to also help support students' growth in the areas of cultural competency and the navigation of difference at the same time. And then we have deepened our understanding of what all of that meant, and most recently in drafting our new 5-year strategic plan, which begins this year and goes until 2026. One of our 5 commitments in that plan, and there's only 5, one of the 5 commitments is on your screen now, to deepen student engagement with local and global communities and issues. And this includes expanding and deepening programming that fosters global learning and leadership, and that galvanizes student engagement and action on globally significant issues. And that is the introduction to the Hart House Global Commons. And now I'm delighted to throw it to my colleague, Jennifer Newcomb, to talk about the specifics of the Hart House Global Commons. Jennifer.
Thanks, John. I think we're going to start with just a really quick, another video that tells you or demonstrates for you a little bit more about what Global Commons looks like in practice.
I'm a law student at Los Andes University.
I'm Katie Ratty. I'm from Indiana University.
I'm Shannon. I'm a master's student at the University of Cape Town.
We were finding points of connection across our intersecting identities to really open the conversation and begin to shift narratives.
Hello, Indiana.
We need to have more discussion, dialogue, raising awareness.
We help each other understand and become aware.
The American woman is told she can do anything, and she's basically shot down when she does.
That's the challenge with systemic barriers.
The hope is that you walk out of here feeling empowered, like you've got some added tools in the toolbox to turn this exchange of ideas into action.
So that video is just a bit of a snapshot about what Global Commons looks like in practice. I want to go into a little bit more detail just so you can sort of understand the ways that students are able to engage in Global Commons and how it rolls out over the course of the year. And I want to start by talking a little bit about partnerships and programming. The partnership piece is absolutely critical to Global Commons. We really don't function as a program without these really critical partnerships that allow us to work collaboratively and to build out what Global Commons looks like. Maybe we can start with our next slide, which will give you sort of a sense of who our international partners are. These partnerships are really based both in curricular and co-curricular spaces. And they've been consistent since we started in 2017. So these have been 4 and 5 year partnerships at this point. With Sciences Po, which is based in France, we partner with their Student Life Office and their International Partnerships Office. And in some years, we've connected with specific courses or programs that are being offered through Sciences Po. At the Universidad de los Andes, which is based in Bogota, Colombia, we work with their Faculty of Law. At Indiana University, we're partnered with the Hamilton Lugar School of Global and International Studies and with their residential living and learning program. And then at University of Cape Town, we're connected to the UCT's Global Citizenship Program, which is a really innovative curricular and co-curricular program that focuses on activating students' citizenship. Here at the University of Toronto, we also have multiple partners. U of T has 3 active campuses. And so we have partners based on all 3 campuses, and again, connected to both curricular and co-curricular spaces on campus. We are working with the Monk School for Global Affairs and Public Policy. At the University of Toronto in Scarborough, we have an emerging partnership with Critical Development Studies. We work with Student Life with the Center for Community Partnerships, the Center for Student Engagement at UTM, and then our international student centers on all 3 campuses as well. In terms of community partners, those change dependent on the topic and the themes that we are focused on. And they can include everything from community organizations providing content expertise or facilitating sessions, offering workshops, and also providing opportunities for students to engage in more active ways. Partners also engage with us in different ways, and those have evolved over time. And they can be anything from lighter touch and promoting Global Commons to their constituents to co-development of program. And we've really tried to be responsive to partner needs and interests and adaptive as those have changed and evolved, and capacity changes and evolves as well, but really value our opportunities to work closely with those international partners, particularly in co-development of programming. In the next slide, I'm just going to walk through some of the essential components of the programming. Again, it looks a little bit different. We've tried to be responsive to feedback, and so it looks a little bit different from year to year, but these are really the essential components. The first is that there are 3 to 5 what we would call dialogue spaces available each year. Those are larger scale events that have between 40 to 140 people in attendance. They're open to all students, so you get a very multidisciplinary group of students and a strong mix of graduate and undergraduate students as well. They typically start with a scene setter or an expert voice who can provide some context and a shared starting point for the conversation. And then students will move into small groups of about 5 with a student facilitator and a couple of questions to get them started and to really sort of dig into the themes and the content of those sessions. Pre-pandemic, those sessions would often be about 3 hours in length, and we might gather in each of our international spaces in person and then use technology to connect. In the past year, as we've moved into a COVID context, we've shortened those a little bit to 2 hours, and all participation is now virtual. We also often provide a resource as a starting point prior to the session. So that could be an article to read or a podcast or some materials to look at. Again, typically provided or created by the speaker, but to give us some shared understanding as we're moving into those spaces. We've offered short courses, and those might be 4 to 6 weeks in length. And those give students a chance to connect with each other over multiple weeks and to dig in a little bit deeper around the topic. There's a greater opportunity for interaction and some opportunities for skills development in that. So sometimes those sessions have been workshop based, And there have been opportunities for students to actually do something collaboratively with each other. One example of that might be last year we did, our theme was focused around climate action, and students actually had an opportunity to work in small groups within this short course context to develop an opinion piece together, which they then in some cases published. There's also opportunities for engagement with NGOs in that context. We provide training opportunities. So I mentioned that in our large sessions, students act as facilitators. So we provided training for students in inclusive facilitation and deliberative dialogue. And those are skills that they can both practice within this small group context and then bring forward. And the other really key piece is dialogue to action, really valuing the important opportunity for students to engage in dialogue, but then also have pathways to engage in action following that. And that's looked at, we've tried a number of different ways of doing that. It's included things like providing information about other opportunities that might exist in our communities and on our campuses for programming, for workshops, for volunteer opportunities, and as well as opportunities to volunteer within community-based organizations as well. And so that looks like a communication that we share out with Global Commons participants that identify some of those pathways. I mentioned that there were activities embedded in the short courses that also provide some opportunity to move from dialogue to action. And then we look at that within the context of our student organizing committee as well. So really trying to build that out. And there's also a student organizing committee, which I'll talk a little bit more in one of the next slides, but that is also a way for students to connect with each other, to help us to shape the Global Commons sessions and focus, and to connect with each other in a deeper way. So on the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about Global Commons themes and the sustainable development goals. So you'll see on this slide a list of some of the topics that we've covered over the last few years. We really try to respond to what students are telling us they want to talk about. So as we're starting each year off, we're having conversations with our student organizing committee, getting feedback from student participants about the kinds of things that they're interested in focusing on. In our first year, we talked about the rise of nationalism. In the second year, peaceful pluralism. And that really maps over SDG 16, which speaks about peace, justice, and strong institutions. Gender equality was 2018-2019, and that speaks to SDG number 5 around gender equality. Our last 2 years have focused on the climate crisis. And so SDG 13 around climate action was really a starting point for those conversations. And as we're moving into this year, I think returning to this conversation rooted in SDG 16 and looking at sort of innovations in democracy. The SDGs have been really, I think, helpful for us in terms of providing a starting point to help us frame some of our conversations, to provide a way to start to think about these really big topics that have kind of a lot of nuance and complex questions attached to them. In some years, we've been very explicit about attaching the themes to the SDGs. In other years, that connection's been a little bit looser. But again, by doing this, it gives a space or provides a space for students to engage directly in these questions. On our next slide, I want to talk a little bit about student engagement and what that looks like. I mentioned that students have the opportunity to participate in dialogue sessions. And again, that's up to about 140 students at each of those. We also have students who sit on our organizing committee who are part of community engaged learning opportunities. So they have the opportunity for credit as part of their participation in Global Commons. The community engaged learning course is based out of New College here at U of T, and it's about 5 to 7 hours a week. And it's meant to be an interdisciplinary placement-based opportunity for an upper level undergraduate student to allow them to work within a social justice context. We also have students who sit on our organizing committee who are part of the University of Toronto's work study program, which is a work integrated learning opportunity that provides about 10 hours a week of paid work on campus and is intended to give students an opportunity to really deepen their knowledge, develop some skills, and try to explore how their academic work might connect with career possibilities as well. And so students in work study positions have also been part of our student organizing committee. All of these opportunities have also been connected to the University of Toronto's institutionally supported framework around co-curricular records. So we have a co-curricular record here at U of T, And so students who participate in Global Commons are also able to get CCR recognition for their participation. The next slide gives us a little bit more detail on that student organizing committee and their opportunities. There's about 15 students on that group. It varies from year to year, and they develop subcommittees as needed. They do part of the planning around Global Commons, provide us feedback. There are opportunities for dialogue to action within the student organizing committee space. They help support outreach and communication about Global Commons events, and they support the facilitation. And so we've just sort of highlighted what some of those skills development opportunities are as part of participating on that student organizing committee. And the committee really works together for about 8 months out of the year. We're actually starting a bit early this year, and we'll have them gather over the summer as well. And they meet about every 3 weeks to bring the project forward. And then on the next slide, I just want to give you a sense of what some of our numbers have looked like. Since we started Global Commons in 2017, we've hosted 26 sessions, had just over 1,300 participants in those sessions. And these next two numbers are really related to the last 2 sessions that we've hosted. And students who participated in those sessions, about 95% of them indicated they felt motivated to engage in action as part of their participation in Global Commons. And 90% indicated that they'd heard perspectives they hadn't considered. So I'm going to just turn it over to Marco and Kanishka at this point, who will go a little bit deeper into some of the things that we've learned over the last few years.
Hello, sorry, technical issues there. Yeah, thank you, Jen and John. I think what we'll do now is kind of flow through what we're continuing to learn from the Global Commons. And we'll start that off with kind of a central question that myself and Marco are thinking about for each of the following elements. So globally networked learning, critical perspectives, dialogue to action, and student feedback. And to kind of provide you a sense of the headspace we're at and kind of the wavelength that we're on, we'll consider these questions from our particular perspectives and positionalities. So myself as a recent graduate and somebody who has participated in the Global Commons as kind of a student and then on the student committee and now a staff support, as well as Marco, he's been a staff and educator working on creating and shaping these spaces for students and participants for many wonderful years now. So I'll pass it over to Marco to kind of begin our learning journey together at Globally Networked Learning.
Great, thank you, Kanishka, and hello, everyone. So we're going to speak to these 4 points that are currently on the slide. If we could advance to the next one. And 2 more points. Great. So these are the sort of 2 questions that we're thinking on when it comes to globally networked learning, and we're using globally networked learning and global classrooms interchangeably here. Many of you are probably familiar with both of those terms. Obviously, we've seen a rise in online and global learning since the pandemic has started. So at U of T, for example, our international office has launched a Global Classroom Fund that's encouraged faculty to explore building these spaces and collaborating on curriculum with global partners. And that's a huge and important step for faculty in terms of adopting internationalization efforts. So simply put, these are spaces which bring together 2 or more global education locations into synchronous and asynchronous collaboration and learning. But the technology itself is a means, and it doesn't in and of itself create a successful or educative experience. So it really leads me to think more about the ongoing considerations that educators and faculty must continue to make in building these spaces to bridge divides, to foster collaboration over competition, and create conditions to let students bring more of their full selves to those interactions. So we'll speak a little bit more about some of those, but I wanted to invite Kanishka. I wonder if you could speak a bit about how you came upon the Global Commons.
Yeah, thanks, Marco. Yeah, I came to Global Commons as a student back in 2018, which feels like a whirlwind of a time ago. And I was really looking for kind of a space where I could make sense and understand the world, with others who maybe understood the world, not just maybe, did understand the world in very different and diverse ways. I was looking very intensely and deliberatively for kind of a space where I could speak to the realities of my own life and others could speak to their realities, and we can see how those realities and kind of make the linkages and the connections. You know, how are our lives inherently shaped and connected by one another? How my position and where I stand is beside, on top, on the bottom, in these kind of intermingling wholes with others. And so from a participant in the Global Commons and their events and kind of the series, to being on the student organizing committee, as Jen spoke to now supporting the various initiatives in a staff capacity, I think that together we have learned the importance of crafting a global community of learning that not only kind of communes and convenes multiple perspectives, but finds deliberate ways to dislodge and unsettle the inequities and injustices that shape North-South interactions, and there even being kind of the label of the North and then a label of the South, and how that prescribes, you know, certain roles to each. And what I mean here is to not only kind of come together in a global classroom, but consider the implications of that coming together and how these spaces must be shaped by critical and reflexive thinking. I'll pass it back over to you, Marco, to kind of speak to this critical nature some more.
Great. Yeah, if we could move to the next slide. And the first point, there we go. So we're fundamentally working in a space of internationalization, both at home in Toronto and also providing this internationalized global experience for students at our partner institutions. And so really the question is, how do, you know, John mentioned the strategic plan and our commitments and our values and our pedagogy, how does that inform internationalization? And so obviously Jane Knight's definition is the process of integrating an international, intercultural, or global dimension into the purpose, functions, or delivery of post-secondary education. But within that, it's fundamental to understand that internationalization is not a neutral process. So, you know, for us, it's an intentionality, it's being critical, and above all, being responsive to our students, not only U of T students, but students that are participating in the Global Commons across the multiple contexts and locations, because their lived experience matters, because different ways of knowing and being matter, and because student engagement is not just about acquisition of specific knowledge, but it's about new perspectives and exchanging through dialogue. And so to the next point, Kanishka really works a lot with our partner, the Global Citizenship Program at UCT, and she's been connected to them a lot this past year. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about how this approach shapes our relationship with them, why we see this as a best practice, and how that informs learning outcomes if possible.
Yeah, for sure. So our work with the University of Cape Town, UCT, is kind of grounded in a recognition and upon the kind of principle and value, as Marco said, that global learning is not neutral, it is political and must be approached in such a way. With UCT, we have really been experimenting with alternative pedagogies and approaches to learning, and thinking about how we can kind of learn in ways that traditional, you know, education models have deemed unworthy of critical attentiveness. So our recent training, as Jen spoke about, one of the kind of key aspects for students is the ability to build skills and to learn through training. And so we've recently had a training for facilitation titled Facilitation for Healing, the Personal as Political. And so this was a chance for students to learn how to share their own personal and thus political stories, as well as facilitate the sharing of other people's stories of pain, grief, trauma, struggle, injustice, and joy and happiness. And so this is a very kind of alternative way of thinking about pedagogy and allowing kind of lived and subjective and personal knowledge to be at the forefront. And so by doing this, we've really been able to cultivate spaces where students don't just kind of learn together, but they actively co-create new knowledge with their own stories and their own realities, and kind of the understanding of differences amongst us as kind of the core and center there. And so we've really been able to kind of move beyond theory and think tangibly what it means to adopt a model of pedagogy that moves beyond this notion of like knowledge being transmitted from the north to the south, and adapt kind of a pedagogy of shared and co-created creation that does not kind of repudiate colonizing and racist caricatures. So I know that's a lot. I'll pass it back over to Marco to kind of wrap up our key insights from adopting such critical perspectives.
Yeah, thanks. So we can go to the next point. This is just a snapshot. Obviously, we could talk for hours about this. Just a snapshot of some of the key considerations that we're thinking about in building this space in the global commons space. And we've also listed in some greater detail some of these considerations that support students and educators engaging in global classrooms, which you can actually find at www.inclusiveglobalclassrooms.com, which is a joint project between us and Professor Bettina von Leer at the University of Toronto Scarborough, just pooling together some of our collective best practices and knowledge on these globally networked learning environments and our shared pedagogical approach. So if we can go to the next slide. We're going to briefly go through some dialogue to action. I'm just mindful of time as well. Kaniska is going to speak a bit about how dialogue sits at the center of our approach, and I'm going to speak a bit to the pathways to action and challenges. So I'm going to just pass it over to Kaniska quickly to talk about dialogue as a tool for change.
Yeah, so our central question here is, how can students kind of explore alternative knowledges and develop new understandings? And for us, dialogue is such a tool to kind of explore often marginalized knowledge. And so we really see dialogue as kind of deliberate, shared, and messy, instead of a concept like debate, which emphasizes a stark right or wrong, and then kind of probes competition amongst its debaters. And so for us, dialogue really becomes a means to uncover the invisible, kind of the crevices and hidden realities and knowledges we don't usually encounter in traditional education. Yet, as Jen said earlier, dialogue is not enough. And for students to develop new knowledges, we must develop and foster their own agency, which is where the pipeline of dialogue to action comes in. So this can take forms of having students organize events that they're interested in different thematic areas, such as gender equality or climate justice. Next year, we'll be doing democracy and citizenship, leveraging journalism and op-eds, as Jen had mentioned, social media. We had, done a video series where we filmed different student leaders on campus, as well as kind of building networks and connections with civil society, such as the Dialogue to Action guide we do that kind of lists different community organizations that students can get involved with and different partner organizations. And so now I'll pass it back to Marco to kind of flesh out the challenges and lessons learned in kind of facilitating a dialogue to action space.
Yeah, so really just thinking about, what have we come up, what are the challenges we've come across in supporting this translation from dialogue to action? And so, one of the fundamental questions is, what's the incentive for students? And so in curricula, obviously there's a credit, a degree requirement, et cetera. But in the co-curriculum, we've got a variety of approaches that we have received pretty positive feedback, and that these have been effective, but it really ranges depending on the student. So, we have the co-curricular record, which is a university approved transcript for extracurricular engagement. Students will bring passion and passion for the content and topic. They really love being a part of this globally connected group, learning about new perspectives. But again, each student's different, and they come to Hard House for a different reason. And so that's going to continue for sure. Also thinking about student capacity and the ask of not only attending events, but these activations, these action impact opportunities. And then another challenge is how do we think about these activations happening in non-Toronto sites? And, so what are the considerations around time frame and planning around time zones and academic calendars and student safety on site? So, for example, how are we, we've seen in Colombia recently that's obviously gives us pause to think about what's realistic and how we can encourage, empower students in Colombia in terms of impact and just being mindful of those real considerations. So, the other fundamental question is, how do we reduce the 100% additional ask from co-curriculum? And part of our exploration of all these considerations has actually led us to developing some new partnerships with faculty members, both in Toronto and abroad, to explore how to create these sustainable opportunities, connections, and initiatives for this co-curricular and curricular integration. So That's actually what we're working on right now with a Pan-Canadian and international partnership on what we're calling the Global Classroom for Democracy Innovation. So that's another snapshot of some of the challenges. If we can go to the next slide, we're just going to briefly go through some of the student learning and feedback and try to wrap up in the next couple of minutes. So if we can go to the next slide as well. Kanishka is just gonna run through, if we had to distill it into 4 central pillars, what would they be?
Yeah, I think we can. Yeah, so those are the 4 right there. So these 4 central pillars are first exposure to and exploration of multiple different perspectives, beliefs, and ideas, such as, the student organizing committee is at the front and center of a lot of the Global Commons work. The second would be exposure to civil society, actors, NGOs, and community organizations. Jen talked a lot about this, so I think you'll have a clear picture of that. The third is exploration of topics with peers through dialogue. We have a Discord server that houses multiple different channels and is kind of also a dialogue and action space. And then the fourth is options for reflection and agency. So we do kind of roundup of resources of events, opportunities, and organizations that folks can engage with, and then send that out after events. So to kind of keep the dialogue going on and reflection kind of sustaining itself over time. Yeah, so I'll pass it back to Marco to kind of go into more student feedback sort of things.
Yeah, we can just put all these up. This is just sort of another snapshot of some of the the feedback we've received from students around across all the participant locations. Just a sort of a select few sort of quantitative feedback we've received. I mean, I think really students telling us that it's a valuable use of their time is something that I look at, and for me, that's really important because there's so many things that they can be a part of. And when they choose to be part of the Global Commons and they find that valuable, nothing could make me happier as an educator and someone building this space. And then the next slide is really a quote from one of our students, and really speaks to the idea that all students care about topics in different ways. And so, and we also need to think about how students are coming to these spaces. So, an engineering student gains a new understanding from an issue that they might not have otherwise been a part of or been connected to. That's a win in our books. So just a quick quote to wrap up our presentation. One more slide, actually. And Kanishka will close this off.
Yeah, so this map was created, I'm sure you saw in the video, in kind of real time during a Global Commons session via SMS and email from all the different locations. So I think it just emphasized that the Global Commons is kind of a place to convene folks who are very similar and very different from one another. And the Global Commons kind of becomes a shared community of students who are able to understand themselves and belonging in relation to one another. So I'll now pass it back over to John to kind of lead us to the end. And to move us from what we've learned to kind of next steps.
Well, thanks so much, Kanishka and Marco and Jen. I want to move as quickly as possible into 10-minute breakout rooms. In response to the question that I know is on the tip of everyone's fingers, what's next? We're hoping to expand our partnerships. We have the only really inhabited continent where we don't have a presence or a partner right now is Asia. And so we are in discussions with a number of universities in Asia. The challenge about them joining the Hard House Global Commons kind of coalition, if you will, the challenge there, even though we live in a global village, is that it's still a global village with multiple time zones. So we are trying to figure out a way of achieving meaningful synchronous learning with universities that are 12 hours apart from each other. That can be a challenge, but we have not given up, and we have a number of really exciting conversations going on right now. We also have been really thrilled, as Kanishka described, to deepen some of our partnerships with some of our other partner campuses in terms of their bringing their expertise to bear to really enrich the program across all participating institutions. The University of Cape Town example, the training and facilitation and dialogue skills, some joint short courses we've done with some of the other campuses, really exciting. We want to develop that further. And also we have the three of the SDGs that Jen alluded to, number 16, number 10, number 5. There's also, of course, number 13 on climate justice. These are all areas where we want to maintain our sense of framing and focus so that students that are meeting on the ground, wherever the ground is for them, will know that at some level they are connecting to an international conversation and set of commitments around these really pressing global issues. Jen, are there any questions? Sorry, I dropped my pen. Are there any questions in the chat that we should address before we go into small groups?
I think we're good. We've got about 15 minutes left. So I think if we can move into the small groups, if anything else comes up, we can address those at the end.
Great. So we're going to move into small groups for 10 of those minutes. You've heard from us. We are now inviting you to reflect on some of the considerations that are important for doing this kind of work and some of the questions that we grapple with. The questions are now on the screen. There are 3 that we're suggesting as starting points for you, and you might want to use these, or you might want to dispense with them and generate your own questions. Congratulations, you are all facilitators. These are self-facilitated small groups that give you an opportunity to engage with each other. We're hoping about 5 people will participate in these groups for 10 minutes. And please focus on whatever is meaningful to you. As I say, these questions or others that will be relevant to you. And then when we come back, we will ask you to share some of the key ideas that emerge. So Valerie and Aaron, I think, are putting you into small groups. And we look forward to talking with you in about 10 minutes.
to raise your hand, you can use that as well, and I'm happy to call on folks. But just interested, I know we had a few minutes in the small groups. If there's anything that anyone wants to share back from those conversations, anything that particularly resonated for you. I'm just realizing I don't think I can see the raise hand function here. So maybe just put your comments in the chat and we can call on you from there. Anything come up for folks or any questions for us? Marco, can I just pass it to you to let me know if there's anything in the chat that we can that we might want to highlight?
Yeah, sure. So, Mirella's mentioning, nice conversation around how we continue facilitation of conversation and raising awareness to providing students the support to take action. One group chatted a little bit about their programs that take place on their campuses and how there's really some hope on capitalizing on these sort of guiding global principles and then bringing them down to a student, like a sort of a peer-to-peer model and help students with global learning and development. Some talk about the challenge of engaging students in the conversation alongside the pace of social media. So, the time it takes to organize a discussion versus the sort of 160 character tweet, how things play out in social media. And another group discussed the challenges of culture and context when having discussions globally, that freedoms aren't universal, which is that's a huge point, obviously, when thinking about the North-South dynamic and those considerations of safety and expression and how they can be different across the world. Different discussion as well about opportunities and promotion of international professional development and educational experiences for students and how those can be more accessible in a virtual environment. And I think we've all seen some of the power of the virtual space. And so hopefully some of those elements stick around in the future. Yeah, that's what's come up in real time, everybody. Thank you for sharing. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's really terrific. And I would say that I think a lot of those themes are the things that we are also kind of grappling with in an ongoing way within our spaces as well. I think we're at wrap. It's 11:02. I just really want to appreciate thank you on behalf of our team for the chance to share about what we're doing, to learn from you, to hear about some of the things that you're thinking about as well. We'll give you our contact information. So if there's at any point you'd like to reach out, we would be happy to connect with you. And also wanted to let folks know we're actually hosting our next Global Conversations session this Thursday on Black Lives Matter, global activism 1 year later, in close partnership with our partners at University of Cape Town. So that's this Thursday. Really appreciate it. I want to turn it back to David, and thanks everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone on the Heart House team, for putting this together, especially in light of the fact that you are doing an actual Global Commons later this week. So I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to both showcase this work and create an engaging space for our participants, where we all got to meet new folks, which was really exciting for me. So we are at the end of this Global Hub, but I do want to spend a little bit of time very quickly reminding people of what's coming up for the Global Summit. So we really want to encourage everyone to engage in the pre-recorded sessions before Thursday. There's 26 great sessions that are on a YouTube channel, and there's the bios of all the presenters are on our conference website. So please do engage and watch the pre-recorded sessions and come ready with question and answers for Thursday. Today will be the first regional hub for Caribbean, Central America, and North America. That will be happening at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. So in about 2.5 hours from now. So those people in those regions, please make sure that you are able to come to the regional hub. And then tomorrow, we have a whole series of interregional hubs. We have the interregional hub for Middle East, Asia, and Oceania. I know information has been sent out to the participants for that interregional hub. We also have a really exciting student panel on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern time. And then again, the interregional hub for Africa, Europe, Caribbean, Central America, North and South America. So thank you for the conversations and looking forward to seeing you in the regional hubs and the student panel. And I hope you all have a great day. Take care.